716. And Anne has called from Penrith. What would you like to say?
Hi, hello. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.
Well, I just wanted to make the point, because often I listen to these conversations and it always seems to me that the most obvious explanation is always overlooked or avoided. I'm looking at a graph here, which I did send through on the WhatsApp, but obviously everyone can't see it. It's the ONS Labour Market Survey, and it shows the number of people who are economically inactive and due to long-term sickness. And in January 2020, there were 2.1 million people. And from then, it skyrockets, as you say, and goes up to 2.8 million. So there was an increase of 33% from January 2020 until December 2024.
Okay. Why
would the answer, or at least a large part of the answer, not be the COVID pandemic? The government and the politicians and the people who are in charge of the economy declared that the pandemic was over, that it was no longer important, that we didn't need to worry about it anymore. They encouraged everybody to just carry on with their lives, go ahead and not worry about being infected. That has definitely led to people becoming long-term sick. I myself, in October 2021, based on the public health advice I was given, I was 39 years old. I apparently didn't need to worry about being infected. Went about my life, got infected, and was disabled by it, and was unable to work. But it's not just me. I'm just one person, and there are millions of other people who the exact same thing has happened to, and it is always ignored. And I do genuinely believe that is on purpose. So what is happening? So you're talking about this Times article. The government are shocked and surprised, apparently, by this massive increase in the number of people who are suffering with long-term sickness. The government sanctioned the mass infection of the population, told everybody, reassured everybody that it would be okay for them to be repeatedly infected. Now we've got lots and lots of people who are long-term chronically ill. And what do they want to do about it? They want to remove the safety net. They sanctioned the infections, and now they want to remove the safety net. I think that is despicable. And any discussion that is talking about the increase in long-term sickness that doesn't talk about the long-term harm to health that is caused by COVID is intentionally, as far as I'm concerned, misinforming people, because this is happening. There are millions and millions of people around the world. Some estimates, which were from a long time ago now, were 400 million people around the world who are suffering with long COVID. And everybody is scratching their head about the increase in long-term sickness. It's madness.
Yes, I think that you've said so much there that I think is so very important, Anne, and I'm so sorry to hear about your experiences. And again, you've made me remember, so I went to China many times, but I went after SARS. And a long time after SARS, many, many years after. And everybody was still wearing masks as almost like a hygiene thing. Yeah. And I remember speaking to my Irish friend about it and her saying, yeah, we wear masks here when we've got a cold and stuff, like way more than you do in the UK. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's not this huge culture. If they're doing it in Ireland, it's not this huge culture difference that I think it is. It's just in the UK. We don't like... I'm sure that I've seen more people here in the UK than in other countries not covering their mouths when they cough, yawning in other people's faces.
This is the problem. And you talk about solutions, and as somebody who has been forced into thinking about this a lot more than most. There are solutions. There are things that could be being done, but because it wouldn't. They believe that it wouldn't be politically advantageous for them to start talking about the fact that we do need to think about public health. We do need to try and stay well as a population, and there are simple things that we can do to reduce transmission. It is so frustrating as somebody who was disabled by COVID and now has to try and live in a society where everybody is under the impression that it is mild and it's not a problem anymore. And the reason they're under that impression is because the UK HSA and our government are not putting out public health awareness campaigns. When I got sick in October 2021, I naively thought they're obviously going to have to tell people that this is what is happening. I was horrified. I joined Facebook groups when I got ill thinking, what the hell is happening to me? Joined these groups and was horrified by the fact that there are these enormous groups with hundreds of thousands of people in, with them all saying exactly the same thing. I'm not getting better. I'm not getting better. Those groups are still enormous, and there's people joining them every single day. And I think that it should be mandatory for everyone to join these Facebook groups and read these comments so that you can see what is actually happening. And the UK HSA are not telling people. I didn't know in 2021 that as a woman who was, I guess, middle-aged, at 39, I was the most, and am, one of the most high-risk groups, because it disproportionately affects women who are middle-aged. Where's that information in the public domain? Are they giving out this information? No, they're not saying anything about it. I follow the UK HSA on social media because I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see the warnings. And 4 years on, there's still nothing. And that is not a mistake. That is intentional. And because they don't want to talk about it, because if they talk about it, they will have to acknowledge that they allowed this to happen and they continue to allow this to happen. But at some point, they will have to. They have to acknowledge that this is what's happening, because you're going to continue to disable the working population. And it's not just the working population, it's children as well. Since I became ill myself and found out more about it, I used to be a teacher, and I'm a mum myself, and started looking into whether or not it affects children. And of course it affects children. That was always a myth, that children are unaffected. And so I now spend a lot of my time trying to raise awareness about the fact that this is also affecting children. There are over 111,000 children, according to the ONS, from last year's figures, that are struggling with long COVID. Where's that in the headlines? So it's not just the working population. We've got children with it as well. And it honestly, it beggars belief that any of these discussions are allowed to happen, and all these articles are being written where people are talking about long-term sickness but not talking about the reason why there are now so many chronically ill people. It's not confusing.
And thank you so much for your call. And I think what you've also articulated there is the short-termism of the thinking of we have to prioritise the economy. And, we can't have lockdowns, we can't have social distancing because we have to prioritise the economy. Well, what that has led to down the line, and not even that far down the line, is a situation where the economy is suffering because there are so many people who have been infected and are now unable to work. And we've got a chancellor who's scrabbling around trying to solve this problem that isn't of her making. It was a different government that completely mismanaged COVID back when it first arose. And really disturbing article I read in the BMJ earlier this week, where there was an expert that estimated that about 180,000 deaths could have been avoided if we had adopted a different style of managing COVID as they did in other countries, and listened to the lessons that had come from countries like China. But instead, you had all of this campaigning that happened in newspapers like The Telegraph, and people saying, oh, it's just like a bad cold and it doesn't harm anyone, died with COVID, not died of COVID. And I'm not saying that lockdowns weren't incredibly harmful. They were incredibly harmful, not least of all because they were implemented at the wrong time and were a lot longer than they needed to be. I mean, the whole thing was just dreadfully mismanaged. But what we didn't do was amend our behaviour at all. It was like, right, back to work, back to normal as you were. And now the economy is suffering more than it needed to. So that was a bit of an own goal, wasn't it? Sorry about the rant. I'm going to go to Steve in Manchester now.